in intellectual terms, because the majority of people aren't fucking intellectuals. If you don't strike, is actually, however small, however tiny it may be, because workers have got to act together. It's the seeds and it's the fucking embryo of what socialism it actually is.
We were absolutely convinced that music was a force for change. With a Clash, you know, of course they were radical, of course they were political, but how committed they were, it's difficult to say. What they did achieve was to inspire so many people. If you were going to present, you know, lyrical content that's political, that is meaningful, there needs to be some kind of focus around that. And that's where the idea of the Redskins comes in. The other thing that people have to understand is, you know, we go out and do whole tours. I'd have a baseball bat behind my amplifier. We did these gigs in Germany. They set fire to our van and they confiscated 3 guns off people in the door. The original kind of scene of revolution, and you're playing a gig there in front of 200,000 people. This is like incredible. I never earned a penny out of the Redskins.
When the world falls apart and something stays in place.
Jam style council special. The charts was incredibly political.
I know it was.
And Levi stumps his run down his face.
Did you introduce yourself?
No.
Oh, okay.
Not mine. Formerly the bass player with the Redskins.
33 and a bit years ago, I pointed the camera at, well, me and my friends pointed the camera at you and asked you questions in a flat in Hackney.
Wow.
That ended up as Beating the Blues. Was it called that?
It was called that. I remember doing interviews when we did the gig at the ICA.
Yes. We
I
did
remember
that.
chatting there. I don't remember the subsequent material. It's really funny because somebody introduced me to this Facebook group. And I had a look on there and I ended up saying, you seem to know more about my life than what I actually remember. And it's interesting because when people start mentioning anecdotes and things, a lot of it you just simply can't remember.
No.
You know, so it's because I think so much happened. I think that's the key to it. You know, there was so much happening at that time. Whether it been actually specifically being involved with a band, or just, I suppose, the political climate generally. You know, everything seemed to be so fast moving. Then everything seems relatively slow in comparison these days. But my mother was and still is a hippie, you know, and certainly grew up through the, you know, that she was a teenager in the late 50s, early 60s. You know, she grew up through the Beatles, you know, through I suppose the hippie movement, you know, through the 70s, everything that happened musically through that time. And to some extent was politicised through that. She was involved in Rock Against Racism. She was involved in the Socialist Workers' Party, although I don't think she was ever a member. But certainly a number of her partners, you know, that I remember were. So I grew up to some extent in not a radical household, it'd be hard to say. I mean, we were a single parent family, so that in some extent is radical, particularly in those days because it's much harder. Growing up in a single parent family in the 60s and 70s, a very different situation to I think how it is now. It was certainly very frowned upon. In terms of music, my mum, again, was, you know, music was always kind of around because, I mean, my mum in particular, she used to go see the Beatles when she was young. She grew up in Southport, and her and her sister used to nip off to Liverpool, and obviously one of the bands they got the chance to see was the Beatles. My first recollections of actually going to, I suppose, large-scale events was Carnival 2, Elvis Costello, the Northern Carnival, which I think possibly was prior to Carnival 2, to see the Buzzcocks there, and Steel Pulse I think were on there as well. This must have been 1978, 1979, so I will have been about 13, 14 then. We went carnivals in Bradford, Leeds, and I suppose the most memorable one was an event in Leicester where all hell broke loose and there was this kind of pitched battle with the police, and And that had quite an impression on me, particularly because my mum's partner at the time was arrested and like given a considerable fine and stuff for the whole, for the whole process. So in many ways, I sort of was, I suppose, introduced to politics at a very early age. And one of my mum's boyfriend at the age of 11, he gave me Homage to Catalonia by George Orwell as my Christmas present. I read this and wow, this is amazing, So at the age of 11, being introduced to, the sort of politics of the Spanish Civil War was quite enlightening, particularly when you started to meet the old tankies and Stalinists of the Communist Party who were, very much sort of prominent, certainly within the trade unionist movement and stuff those days. So, yeah, I did have that quite formative introduction. I left school no jobs because Thatcher had, decided that actually no, we'll just let everything crash. And so there's a whole generation of people. So there was a logical reason for us to be political. There was genuine things happening in the world.
Yeah, and I think the early 80s, what's quite interesting is, when you think of, jam style councils, specials, even the Pogues and something like that. Incredibly, the charts was incredibly political at that point.
It was, yeah.
Almost more than the late 70s. Do you see what I mean?
Yeah.
Those, and it would have been partly because of who was in government and who, what we were going through. There was,
That was the great thing about then as well. We had people like Weller alongside, as you say, Jerry Dammers, The Clash. It was all there.
Yeah.
And that's where the idea of the Redskins comes in, because you need, I think, if you were going to present, lyrical content that's political, that is meaningful, there needs to be some kind of focus around that gives people something to catch on to. And it doesn't have to be crass or it doesn't have to be crude, but we thought that this idea would help to polarise a situation that we thought was very negative, in that skinheads were typically perceived as being racist. You see, that stereotype that skinheads are racist, you see, it's not just aimed at skinheads. It's also saying basically that working class kids are thick and stupid and they can't actually see the difference. They can't understand that they're part of a culture that actually is inherently rooted, in black culture, and they're all a bit stupid. So it's a lot of things comes into that. It allows you to talk about an awful lot of interesting, I think, political points that I think as well allows you to sort of defend the culture of your class. The change point was the Peel session. When we did the Peel session, we, I suppose very much influenced by the Jam, we decided to get a brass section in, and then that kind of, in many ways, defined the sound. So we didn't really know what it was going to sound like. We just got them in, and they played something and it worked, and it was like, wow, that's brilliant. And that was quite amazing. So I think it's very much the influence of the times that people were looking back in their musical history. And also, prominent figures were doing that. Weller was doing that. They'd always done that, the Jam. It was very much part of, and I think they were very influential for a number of musicians around that time, The Clash, obviously, their sort of perspective was reggae. And we can't go through all that. We'd have the two-tone thing. So where else do you look? Where do you look for influence? And I think, soul music, and I think as well, if you want to be political, there's an incredible strand of politics that ran through soul music, it's a logical step in many, many ways, to look in that direction. It's quite interesting, punk sort of going around and never trust a hippie and things like that. But the truth is, the punks were massively influenced, I think, by that movement. Certainly the political punks were, because it was that generation prior, they were the ones who really nailed us politics and music in a modern context. But Rock Against Racism in many ways was, incredibly influential, I think, to people in terms of seeing how music and politics could work together. We know it happened in the past, but this was a real life example of it happening here and now. That we weren't old enough to see those examples in the past. But, I mean, people think that, the Redskins were radical. Well, you know, Country Joe and the Fish might seem like a joke, but just go and look at what those guys did. Half of them were draft dodgers that every time they did a gig, they had to dive into the van and disappear because they were going to get arrested, you know, but they were still doing it publicly, and they were liable to be like chucked in prison for 20 years, yet they were still So it's, you know, there's an incredible tradition of music and politics, and using music as a vehicle for politics. And that's when I say it's like I can't, off the top of my head, I can never remember.
It's almost too big.
It's all there.
Yeah,
it's just like you just have to look a little bit deeper.
No, sure.
But as I say, the difference with the Redskins is we were maybe we were slightly more left-leaning, you know, than other artists had been in the past. But, you know, it doesn't mean we were more committed. I think we were just a bit more vocal about it. I think the difference with us was that we said our purpose is politics.
I mean, I was just more wondering, kind of, to go back there. Where did these conversations happen? Were they in car journeys? Were they?
It never stopped happening. It happened every minute of every day, and that's the reality.
For you, particularly for you guys as Redskins.
Yeah, every minute and every day is what life was about. You know, it was absolutely fundamental and primal to everything that you did. You know, I think that was it's kind of, I mean, in some ways as well, to me, it was a logical, this might sound odd, but it was also a logical extension of kind of being into punk rock. And it's, you know, it's like the Clash.
Exactly, that's what I was going to say.
You know, I shake my head in disbelief, you know, in the sense that the Clash were incredibly influential. With the Clash, you know, of course they were radical, of course they were political, but how committed they were, it's difficult to say. You know, it's very difficult to say. But that shouldn't undermine or diminish what they achieved, because what they did achieve was to inspire so many people, you know, to want to get into music and to do music that was political.
I think Jerry Dammers was probably partly reacting to that, partly to the inspiration, but partly to saying I want to do it differently, and then yourselves.
But the Specials did it right. You know, I mean,
right.
They were brilliant, and what they did, they were incredibly effective. You know, they were brilliant social commentators, and it was absolutely clear what they were talking about. You know, and maybe Ghost Town is the most successful political song in history. You know, it's hard to argue what was more successful.
It's not Nelson Mandela or something, do you know what I mean?
Well,
in terms of another song.
I know. But I mean, the thing about Ghost Town is it was at #1 when unemployment hit 3 million. You know, it literally went to #1 as unemployment hit 3 million. And
the riots, you know, burst out at that same moment.
I mean,
the response, people's response.
The social commentary was brilliant from the Specials, and it was absolutely spot on. And I think they did it so much better. You know, and in many ways, I think for us, they're probably a much bigger, well, maybe not for Chris, for me, definitely, they're a much bigger inspiration in terms of how you delivered, you know, politics and music together. Miners went out on strike and they forced Scargill to actually, Scargill didn't want them to go out on strike as far as I remember. You know, he was forced by the rank and file miners to actually declare a national strike. It didn't seem that the union executive wanted to initially. You know, so it seemed that the pressure had come from below. But Keep On Keeping On was very much, you know, about people being in struggle. You know, and Chris may have adapted the lyrics, you see, specifically at time, you know, so it was appropriate to the miners' strike. But I never earned a penny out of the Redskins. I mean, it paid a wage to me of £100 a week for about 3 years. I mean, to be honest, even in the 80s, £100 a week was not much, you know. So for the whole time that I was in the Redskins, you know, I was surviving on, you know, effectively what's close to we'd consider minimum wage now. Wasn't far above it, and so you didn't really earn any money. Your costs are quite a lot, you know. And people forget as well that you're often working. I mean, I don't know, 96-hour weeks. You know, it's like. You're working 24 hours a day at times and things. You know, we've got where we have for a reason, right? It's, yeah, the music's good, etc., etc. But, you know, musically, I think there was elements of us that, I think we were definitely one of the best live bands around, right? But, you know, that was to do with all of us. That was about the way that we all performed, etc. But, you know, but in general, we weren't suddenly amazingly more musical or fundamentally better musically than a lot of other bands, but the politics and our commitment to that politics is what differentiated us and was a large part of our success. And I fundamentally disagree with the fact that he wanted to turn his back on that.
Well, he began to choose to while you were still in the band.
That's what he said he wanted to
Really?
do. So I think I need to start writing love songs now. And this was from someone who publicly stated he'd never been in love. So obviously I said to him, so how the fuck are you going to write a love song? You know, if you say you've never been in love, so you want to write love songs. I said, I've been in love. You know, but you won't let anybody else write lyrics. It's like something, it's very much kind of a big contradiction. But don't, you know, in saying these things, I'm not, you know, I've got no problem with Chris. You know, Chris is Chris. He is who he is and stuff. But I don't think he got too wrapped up in himself and didn't see the wider picture. And he let his, I suppose, his opinion of himself or his perspective of who he should be affect what the band was. And the truth is, he wasn't bigger than the band. You know, and it used to be really funny with some of our SWP mates. They so used to take the piss out of him, you know, and that's things that you see. People don't see that, right? It's like my mum used to wind him up mercilessly, you know, and it's like, and people didn't see that side of it, where, you know, those people who knew him, you know, and had known him for years, they didn't let him get away with all that crap, you know, and they kind of would put him in his place and just, you know, sort of laugh at him and say, don't take yourself so seriously and things like that. And then when he actually was there, Chris was really nice and reasonable and a really great guy to be with. But when he kind of, you know, when he didn't have those sort of restrictions on him, he just kind of get very self-obsessed and stuff. And it was a shame. But, you know, it was all of us together that did it. And I think that's the, you know, and I think he thought that that wasn't the case. And that was the problem, you know, that he underestimated the contribution that the rest of us made. And the biggest underestimation he made of our contribution was our patience with him. He solely underestimated how bloody patient we were with him, and the fact that we didn't turn around and kick the fuck out of him because he was at times was so utterly obnoxious. But I think the point is I think what was quite important is that I learned to project very, very quickly, and that's something that a lot of musicians never learn. How to project.
What do you mean by project?
How to transfer what you're feeling here through to the audience, right? And that's
through music and persona on stage, or what?
I don't know.
Oh, okay.
I don't know. I just did, you know, and I knew that I did because people talked to me, and you know, it's like you find that through conversations. We were playing gigs, and they were getting an emotional experience from it. It wasn't just about, you know, we were stimulating an emotional experience with people. That was part of the reason why people really enjoyed it, and I believe that's because we projected really well.
Some of them were kind of
Some were benefits.
a Manatee and things like that.
Yeah.
You know, big festival in Paris and things.
Well, that was brilliant. I mean, that was amazing because that was the biggest gig we ever played in, and there was 200,000 people there. SAS, what was it called? SAS Racism, I think.
Oh,
SOS.
SOS.
SAS. SOS
Blow 'em away.
Racism, yeah. Which was amazing, you know, and, you know, getting on stage in front of 200,000 people, in front of where the Bastille, you know, it's just like, wow, this is amazing. The original kind of scene of revolution, and you're playing a gig there in front of 200,000 people. This is like incredible. We were absolutely convinced that music was a force for change and was a way of attracting people towards politics, you know. But the predominant line in the SWP was, no, you know, we can't have culture, you know, it's like, no, you can't participate in culture. All culture is, you know, sort of tainted by the ruling class and it's their culture, blah, blah, blah. So I'm still convinced that music is a force for change. You know, I think whatever the theory might be, I mean, I suppose Trotsky was a Gramsci, you know, Adorno, etc. These foremost cultural commentators were all convinced that, you know, culture itself was never a force for change. Well, I think within, not in the sense that maybe, you know, we perceive it to be for what we've seen, because they were all prior to what we see now in popular music. And I think what we've seen in popular music definitely, you know, in the latter half of the 20th century absolutely fundamentally demonstrates that popular music is a significant force for change. And let's just say popular culture, because, you know, whether it's for the better, I don't know. But it is a significant force for change. We can't deny that, you know. I'm now a music educator. I have transformed from seeing music as a transformational force in society through politics to music as a transformational force through education. That's my gist these days, I suppose. So, but I think the key thing is I've still got a strong faith in music as a force for change, which you know, I'm not sure how. Seems like people seem to see social media as, you know, has replaced it in many ways in terms of being at the focal point of youth culture now. If we can even say that youth culture exists in the form that us older generation may recognise it. Well, there we go.
Yeah, I think it's probably widened, doesn't it? Do you know what I mean? Music was more central. You know, music was one of the components, but it's widened.
I think it's much wider. I think music is much more of an aside now than it used to be. I don't think it's defining in the way that it used to be. I don't think people define their personality, their look, through their musical affiliations in the way that they used to, certainly when we were, you know, teenagers and young adults, definitely. So what I love about music now is the anonymity that the internet and being able to create music, distribute it on the internet provides. There's the whole DIY ethic that we wanted in punk that was kind of there. We've really got it now. It really exists. It's absolutely 100% real now. Anyone can go out and make music now. I think that's what I love about music now. There's a democracy to it that potentially we've never had in the past. Computers, you don't need to play instruments anymore. You can make music on a computer. You don't have to be clever. Music's open to everyone in a way that it never has been before. We've got this real contradiction. We've got this amazing accessibility and democracy in many ways in terms of, you know, ability levels. Music really is something that's now open to creativity in a way that potentially it wasn't in the past. And modern technology's allowed that. But at the same time, we've got this incredibly horrible sort of dumbing down and blatant commercialism, you know, in the things of the... And don't get me wrong, Simon Cowell's very clever and he's amazingly successful and he's brilliant at what he does, but, you know, it's not exciting, is it, singing cover versions?
What he produces, no.
I'm going to have to stop.
Yeah,
I really am, yeah. So,
Mark,
yeah,
it's brilliant.
It's all right.
On the day of reckoning, when we struck on one, watch close as